Hey, Ryan, thanks for joining us today. As we're getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian. My name is Ryan Trudeau. I am based in Minneapolis. And yeah, I would love to give some background kind of on my sales journey. My sales journey kind of, I'm going to bring you all the way back really quickly, actually, to high school, kind of when I was an adolescent, really trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I'm in high school. I knew I wanted to continue with a post-secondary education, had no idea what I wanted to do, right? So I had an awesome guidance counselor at the time, right? That's had told me about a major in management information systems. And there was a couple things that really stood out to me about that major. It was technology focused, and she had indicated to me that somebody had just graduated with that major and had landed a six-figure job post-graduation. I was like, I'm all for it. Like that's what I want. I was all in, love technology, wanted that type of salary. And anything that I put my heart to and I commit to, I see through absolutely to the end. And I kind of envision myself, right? Like being that person that those guidance counselors could go talk about. So went through that whole major, graduated with, with incredible grades. Felt like I put myself up for success. Did a few different internships. Graduated, and then I, hit the market in Minneapolis. And it was a very challenging job market, and ended up taking a job as a help desk technician. Very different than where I thought things were going to go. But I told myself, hey, you know what? I'm still going to commit to this job. I'm going to see this through, and I'm going to give it my all. And that's what I did. And I really started to work myself up the ranks within IT, where I, got into software engineering, even was a developer kind of at one point, and got to the point where I actually landed with a really small startup. When I got there, it was less than 20 people. So I wore many different hats. I was building different teams. I was building an implementation team. I was leading some product development. I was leading a strategic accounts team. I was helping with pre-sales engineering. And as the company really started to grow, I had a conversation with my CEO at the time, and I was like, out of anything that I do, I like supporting the sales team. At the time, it was just two individuals. And I said, I really like supporting them. And I think I could do that. Like, I think I could make that full-fledged leap into sales. I like being more customer-centric. I like being in front of those customers more than anything that I do. And he told me that he thought it was a great idea. He was in alignment to help me get to becoming a sales rep. But the biggest challenge that I had in that transition was that I still had those IT hats that people saw me wearing, and I could never really fully transition into that sales role. So I felt it was in my best interest that if I was going to commit to being in sales, I needed to lead that organization. I needed to go to a little bit larger organization where I was seen truly as a sales resource, not just that technical resource. And I could really start to hone in on that skill set. So that brought me to landing with an organization that sold to government. And I was new to sales. I knew nothing about selling to government, but I was ready to rock and roll. I was ready to go. So I got into that role. And my first year, out of about 100 sales reps I think we had at the time, I ended my first year being number two in the company. And there was two challenges I had with that, though. One, I wasn't number one. I kind of set like an unrealistic goal that I wanted to be number one. And I heard rumblings from other reps that had said that I was given kind of a lucrative territory, I was given a lucrative state, and that a lot of my success was based on luck. And the interesting thing about that, too, is that this luck actually came from the state of Oklahoma, who has one of the smallest state budgets in the country. But regardless, that stood out to me. And at the time, our sales team was actually struggling to fill a role in the Mid-Atlantic. In the Mid-Atlantic states, kind of that DMV area, DC, Maryland, Virginia, they have large budgets. And I went and spoke to my chief revenue officer at the time, and I said, I want to move territories. You're struggling to fill that territory. We're struggling to have success. And I want to prove to people that I can go be successful in a territory that no one's been successful in. Make a really long story short, he agreed to that. And that next year I ended up being the #1 rep in the country or in our organization. And then I did that for a year and then ended up leading a sales team. So I led the eastern half of our state government sales team. And then that's kind of brought me where I'm at today, where I am helping our current organization get into the state, local, and higher education market. So I'm building out an entire team right now.
And did you proactively pick this market? Because SLED is notoriously difficult. State, local education. I mean, it is rough.
I actually tried to get out of it. I can't believe I'm even saying that. So I went, it is so hard. And I did really well selling into government, but it's challenging to your point, and I can talk to some of those challenges, but after when I left that organization, I was like, I'm going to go into commercial selling. I don't want to sell into government anymore. I was a little bit burnt out from it. I lasted 90 days outside of selling into government, and a mentor of mine had kind of roped me back into. He had just become a CEO of an organization, the organization I work for today, and he said, "Hey, we're selling to federal government right now. We want to expand this back, expand this into SLED. Come help us figure that out." So 90 days later, I was back in selling into government. I'm actually really grateful for where I'm at. I have kind of created that niche now, selling into government, and I've enjoyed it.
And what do you like about it? Is it the people are very nice.
People are absolutely incredible. There's a few things I like about it. One, I would say you truly feel like you're making a difference. Selling to government organizations, especially with some of the products that I have sold in the past. At a previous organization, I sold a communications solution that became fundamental to helping communicate pandemic related information during COVID. And I truly felt like I was making a difference. And even in the role that I'm in right now, I work a lot with Office of Inspector Generals and auditors. And again, I feel like I'm helping essentially save taxpayer money and helping kind of reduce the abuse and fraud and waste that kind of comes sometimes in the government sector. Yeah. So I just feel that I'm making a difference. And again, I feel like I've created a little bit of a niche for myself. It's a little bit different, but I feel like I've kind of figured out, I guess, government selling for the most part. I continue to learn every day, but I've figured out a few things.
But does your company understand how state, local, and education works and the issues? Or do they just want somebody to cover it and figure it out and send us the POs?
No, that's an awesome question. No, I think they have it. They understand. I think they have an understanding of state and local. I'm in a very fortunate position where the CEO of my company, he actually used to sell into the state market. So he has a little bit of an understanding of how it works. But I think that the thing that we have learned, again, I mentioned that our company primarily has sold into the federal government. A lot of what federal government does cascades down to state and local. So the same challenges that the federal government is having, state, local, and higher education are having many of those same challenges. We have been able to solve many gaps within federal government, and now we've been able to address those same gaps, state, local, and higher education as well.
Well, what I always noticed was that I agreed completely with that, but state and local, their funding cycles, their fallout budgets, the planning is very different. The use of system integrators is very different than the federal government. And you're dealing with people who don't have profit motive, they have pension motive.
Yeah.
Right? They'll have pensions.
Yes. They're just a little bit change adverse too. Like they don't like change.
Why would you go work for the state and local government if you like change, right? It'd be like,
in that, I think that's the interesting thing, right? In selling into SLED, I'm obviously, here and there selling against other competitors. But what I'm selling to a lot is status quo. I will never forget, and I won't call the state out, but I was talking to an agency a couple months ago, and it was an auditor, and he had a very manual process, and he was talking about that actually a lot of what they're doing is writing things down, like they're not even using anything electronically. So I started talking to him about the efficiencies of moving his workflow, to streamline his workflow into a digital means. And he just wasn't interested in it. So I actually used the pandemic. I said, hey, when you were, during the pandemic, how are you collaborating with your team if you're doing everything on paper? And he goes, honestly, we were taking our papers, we were meeting in a parking lot and exchanging papers, and that works for us. And we like that process. So to your point, like it can be really challenging to get
Yes.
people across that finish line. But I truly think, and I was just having this conversation today, I think if you can start to connect the dots for some of these government employees of how we can help you make your lives easier. Like, I hate to say it like this, but they want to work 9 to 5, right? They do. And I think if I can help them understand this solution is going to help you work that 9 to 5, and it is going to make your job a lot easier, and kind of help them envision themselves in that platform. That's where I start to see a lot of success. But I would say the bigger challenge that I see too in government is, even if they want technology, they know it's so painful. Going back to your budget comment, they know it's so painful to try to
Process.
it's exactly it, try to acquire a solution. And that's where some of my success has come, is in this. I think this is, selling it commercially or government, but especially government. When you get that verbal, it's not even half. You're not even halfway there yet. I mean,
That's just the beginning.
it is just the beginning. In a lot, especially when you're, in the world that I'm in today, selling to audits and inspector generals, they haven't really acquired software before, so they have no idea what they're doing. So one thing I've really prided myself in is understanding that procurement process for them, so they don't have to understand it. I've even really tried to build those relationships with procurement offices and central IT offices, so I can truly guide them through the process. When I get them on board and they're like, all right, I can start to envision the value or the ROI behind this solution. Now I can start to say, all right, we're going to go on a little bit of a journey here. This is a 6-month journey where we are going to have to be working with your IT team very closely. There are strict processes and security, surveys that we're going to have to go through. We're going to have to figure out what contracting is going to look like. Is this going to have to go out to RFP? Are we going to use a cooperative contract? And I try to walk them through that process. And I think that's why I start to really build that trust of, they start to understand, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about. He can truly help me get there. Let's go. Let's do this.
Because that is probably at least half the job.
It is half. A lot of the prospecting I will do leads with procurement. Like I know that government employees, I think there's a shift happening a little bit is we start to see a younger generation too. And I think they are starting to get bought into the idea of, digital transformation. But that's why I initially, my prospecting really starts with those procurement mechanisms to say, hey, I've sold in your state before. I have worked with your procurement team. I've worked with your IT team. I know what they're looking for. And if you feel that this was a solution that brought value to your organization, I can help you get it across the finish line.
Yeah, because in commercial, they have no clue about how to purchase anything. But then you add government, where they've never met the procurement people.
Totally.
They're in a different town, a different county. And they've kind of learned how hard it is to get it done, that they don't try.
That is exactly it.
And half your value is showing them how to get it done, and that you know how to get it done.
That is exactly the value. You don't know how many times I have won deals purely because I know how to get the deal across the finish line. I've responded to RFPs where we're actually the second vendor in line, and that first vendor had no idea how to procure in government, and they came back down to me and said, we can't get this across the finish line because they're unable to, procure the solution. Can you help us? So that absolutely becomes kind of my asset and my value.
And did you come upon this skill or ability on your own, or did a manager say you better learn how to get the contract part down because you'll get a lot of stuff started and very little will come out?
It was a little trial by fire. I mean, I've had some great mentors in my life, especially coming, from my first job in government. But I was put in some situations where I had no other option but to figure it out. And I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but there are states that are far more difficult to procure in than others. And I felt like the first 6 months of me selling into government, I hit all of those very challenging states right off the bat. And I quickly then started to realize, right, this can be how I win. This can be my success. If I can go figure out how to do this in every single state and get ahead of all of this, understanding what cooperative contracts are accessible, to me, starting to build relationships with central IT, understanding the inner workings of the relationship between the agency and between their central IT department. I'm like, to your point earlier, like that can be the value that I bring, to the organization. That's how I can truly gain their confidence and trust. So it's something that I kind of had to learn on my own, and I'm so glad that I've learned it because, like I said, it's created a little bit, for good or bad, it's created a little bit of a niche for me.
It is, and I bet your competitors, most of them just kind of assume that the client can figure this out on their own.
Totally. I had a competitor that tried stealing my procurement knowledge. Actually, very recently, I had a competitor that I was trying to swoop in, kind of steal a deal. The other rep on the other side was obviously holding on to that deal, but that person had no idea how to get it across the finish line. So he was essentially using the buyer as a proxy to understand how I was going to get that deal across the finish line, and then using that information to try to get his deal
Copy
across
you.
the finish line. Yeah. So totally.
And what do you like about state and local? I mean, clearly you're passionate about it.
Definitely. There's there's definitely the niche piece. I think one thing is it's very consistent from like a sales rep perspective, right? Working in commercial, you're always going to see the highs and the lows. Government they always have budget. They always have money. It can be, all right, they're going to tell you they don't have money. So
Right.
a lot of it is, all right, I'm going to help you go find that money. But they always have budget. They always have money. Like I mentioned earlier, they are behind the 8 ball, from more commercial companies. But again, I truly think that they're starting to recognize that they have to catch up to commercial, and I think that really was highlighted during the pandemic. You had all of these physical entities, physical buildings that were closing down, and it was mayhem. People couldn't figure out how to get their unemployment benefits. People couldn't renew their driver's license. People couldn't register vehicles because you had a lot of these states where you could only do that in person. And so all of these states were, started to realize, oh, we have to go through it. We have to start catching up to the commercial setting. We have to, figure out how we're going to digitally transform. And if the government's serving their constituents, right? And now these constituents are so used to these seamless, processes of like buying something on Amazon. How easy is that, right? And I think they're realizing that we have to catch up to that. It is so, everything in government is so painful, and we have to start mitigating some of that friction. We have to eliminate some of that friction that these constituents are having and truly make it easier for them. So they are looking, to organizations for digital transformation efforts. And I think I'm in a very, unique position. Government still continues to think that they're very unique, and I've had the opportunity to work for tech companies that only serve government, and that has also been beneficial
That's
because I
helpful.
do see that trend where government agencies are a little skeptical buying commercial products. They do like to buy products where they believe that they're specifically built, for government. So I just love helping these agencies make their constituents' life easier. I mean, that's
Yeah.
truly what I love about it.
And what characteristic makes you a great salesperson, in your opinion?
I spoke a little bit about it in, understanding,
Their
the
world.
second half of that, like, procurement process. I think that's, one thing that has really, really led, to my success. The other thing that I think that I do really well is truly putting myself into the buyer's shoes, right? One thing I think sellers forget so frequently is buyers are getting flooded with emails, they're getting flooded with phone calls, and everybody thinks that they can help these buyers. But I think you truly need to understand the pains and challenges that these, some of these buyers are having. And I think it's also not a one size fits all. I think I've done a really nice job at understanding the landscape within government. The challenges or issues that your practitioners are having are very different than what your leaders are having. That's, similar in commercial. So understanding how you can help a practitioner versus, a leader, I think is so important. So, I think those are a couple of different things that have led to my success.
So when you prospect, do you go top down or bottom up? Have you found or
I
procurement in?
I it's funny. I do something that's a little bit unique. What I have found is I kind of work in this parallel process, where I know in my mind I essentially have to get four parties to buy off on a acquisition of a software: IT, procurement, leadership, and then the practitioners. Like, all four of those have to be involved. One thing that I think has made me successful and has, set me apart a little bit is first building those relationships within IT and procurement. As I stepped into this role and as I stepped into that previous role, that is one thing that I took some time to do, is to lay that groundwork. Call into procurement offices, make sure they know, who I am. Call into central IT offices, start to build relationships there, make sure they know who I am. I'm not necessarily trying to sell to the procurement offices. I'm not necessarily trying to sell to IT. I just want them to know who I am, what our software is, and how I am, going out to help their agencies. And I'm almost asking a little bit for a blessing, right? Of, hey, I'm going to go out to your agencies. I'm going to talk to them about this solution. Here's how I think I can help them. Are you okay with that? And once I get that blessing, that really starts to help my conversations, right? Because then I can go back to those individuals and say, I've spoken with your procurement team. They we're on a statewide contract, or they understand how we would get a potential purchase across the finish line, or maybe it's IT. I understand your state's IT requirements. You have NIST standards, or you have FedRAMP standards, or you have state RAM standards. This is how our product, meets whatever security standards. But again, I have the blessing from your procurement team and your IT team to speak with you right now. I'd love to speak with you, about some of the challenges you're having. So it's kind of like, in parallel, I'm running and talking to, multiple different departments, and that's what's led to my
You're trying
success.
to prove that you're part of the tribe.
That is exactly it. And having procurement and IT on your side not only increases your success rate, but I think one thing in selling to the government sector that is so challenging is people talk about the sales cycle, right? People always say, "Oh, you're selling into government, 18 to 24-month sales cycle." In my opinion, there's ways to reduce that, and that's how you do it. You don't sit there and wait. You don't. All right, I'm going to go sell to the agency, and then wait until I have to talk to IT, and then wait until I have to talk to the security officer, and then wait until I have to talk to procurement. You're doing all of that in parallel. So now you're taking an 18 to 24-month sales cycle, and now you're reducing that down to 9 or 12 months.
And reducing the likelihood it just dies.
That's absolutely
Because
Absolutely.
most sales reps would go to leadership or user, right?
That's exactly it. That is exact. Yes. And those can be obviously
They're
okay
great. You need
places.
them.
Absolutely. I was, it's funny. I was showing, I just had a deal. It's end of the quarter, right now. And I just had a deal come across the finish line. And I've been working my own deals as I've been building out a team, and I was showing my team what my buying decision team looked like, what my buyer map looked like. And I said, look at this. I have 18 people that were part of this purchase, that were heavily involved in this purchase, that I spoke to multiple times. It wasn't a large purchase. It was, I think, $50,000-$60,000 purchase. But they still had 18 people that had to touch that deal. And it was a good learning opportunity, with my sales reps, to be able to kind of go through and talk about all the different personas that they need to get sign off on to get that deal across the finish line. And again, you can kind of run at that in parallel.
Because most reps would deal with one, maybe two people.
Oh, that
The
is exactly.
champion.
Oh, I see it. I see it all the time. And then they're sitting there waiting for that person to respond back to them. And they're like, I'm stuck now. I don't know what to do. And when you have different divisions, you can start to cross-reference some of that information. Is what the practitioner telling me aligning with what the leader's telling me, or is what the leader telling me aligning with what the IT team is telling me? You can start to cross-reference that. But I've also, it's helped me develop stronger relationships too. I had a deal that I was working on, that they were so impressed that I was already working with IT and procurement, that they just let me go own it. They're like, hey, don't worry about including me on your emails with IT. I honestly don't care. It doesn't mean anything to me. You go deal with IT. Once you have that sign off, let us know, and then we'll proceed.
Because you're almost becoming the champion.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Because
yes.
Most reps would deal with one person who wants it, needs it, and loves it, but they don't have any authority, budget, or know-how to get it done.
Totally. Oh, that's something I preach all the time. Always be testing your champion. That is, my CEO and I were having that discussion, my CRO. That is why deals die. You don't have a chat. You think you have a champion, but you do not have a champion.
You have somebody who's enthusiastic.
I try. That's one thing. In all seriousness, total side note, I feel like has helped me out like a little bit in my career. Is I try to be contagious with that positivity, that passion, and it's, I don't know, something that I've just comes naturally to me, and I've tried to leverage it in my sales career as much as I can.
But as a sales rep, what keeps you excited? Because I can see a lot of people in that market getting burnt out or defeated.
The new challenges. I know that sounds absolutely crazy. I think if I were ever in a role, in a mundane role where I was just doing the same process every single day, I would hate it. I don't know that I'd want to do it anymore. For me, I always want to be learning. And the way that I'm learning is being put into brand new situations, brand new challenges. And as we've been talking about, right, like state and local, selling into state and local, it provides new challenges every single day. And I try to look, I make mistakes all the time, right? And I try to look back on those and really learn from those to make myself a better sales rep. So that's kind of honestly what keeps me going. It's just the new challenges that I'm facing. It can be super frustrating, but I love facing a new challenge every single day and just tackling it head on.
And is there a lot of similarity between the states, or are they all a little?
They're all different, and here's, it's so wild. Are you familiar with with FedRAMP, FedRAMP authorization? Yeah. FedRAMP, just at a really high level, is a security framework that the federal government created to assess cloud providers.
Okay.
All of government used to use FedRAMP, right? And then you fast forward to like 2 years ago, and the state market said, "Hey, we want our own standards, so we're gonna come up with StateRAMP." It's the same thing, but they wanted their own standard, and I suppose there's some small differences. But then each state, you'll see some states that will also alter it. So like in Texas, you have TexRamp. Arizona, you have ASRamp. Virginia has their own IT standards, so it can be very, very complicated. And then when it comes to procurement, you have a majority of states that have this ability to utilize what are called cooperative agreements to be able to purchase off of. If you're familiar with like a GSA contract or something similar in the state market. But then there's some states that won't utilize any type of cooperative agreement. You have to go on a statewide contract. And then every state has different procurement rules where you have these thresholds of, can they make a purchase on their own? Do they need to go to IT for approval? Do they need to go to RFP? In each of those thresholds differ very significantly across state and municipalities. So again, that goes back to what I was, kind of preaching earlier, that you have to become an expert in each state, understanding each contract, each of their rules. It's complicated.
And what do you look for when you look for a state and local rep? Because it's completely different.
It is very, having this, obviously having some of the experience is really nice, but I've actually hired recently a few different reps that haven't had any experience. To me, it really came down to some of the intangibles. You really need someone that is willing to work a deal and kind of grind and not give up. Where I'm going with this is most of the reps I've hired recently have been previous BDRs. And like that correlates to me a little bit. If you think about the BDR role, it's a tough role. And I tell our BDRs all the time, you're selling time, which is way harder than anything else. Anybody can always go find more money. You can't find more time. And that is a job that is so hard. You're always having to, change what you're doing. You're getting 100 no's for every yes that you're getting. And there's just so much complexity that I think sometimes gets overlooked in the BDR role. And that's why I've had a lot of success now hiring BDRs into a government sales role, because they kind of have that grit to them of kind of sticking with the process and understanding that, hey, once I get that verbal, I'm nowhere close to done yet. I can celebrate a little bit, but I have a lot of work to do. So I really kind of look for people that have grit. I look way more for the intangibles than I do for, honestly, some of the experience.
Yeah, cool. Hey, Ryan, really appreciate your time today. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
Absolutely, that's a great question. I am on LinkedIn. You can search Ryan Trudeau. The organization that I work for today is Opexus Tech. We are hiring state and local and federal sales reps. So if you ever have any interest in kind of hearing more about what government has to offer, would love to chat with you. So LinkedIn would probably be the best place to connect with me.